Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaskar, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on a journey of exploring the interesting intersections of numbers and narratives. In the last class, we looked at the structure of a report as far as the technical audience was concerned. We looked at how to organize our information and our knowledge to suit the curiosity and the intuitive preferences of a technical audience. We also saw that this kind of a report was very close to an academic writing structure. So we also, in a way, familiarized ourselves with research writing. We saw different components, what kind of contents should we write in those components, and how to synthesize it all in order to deliver our knowledge for the benefit of a technical audience. So just like that, in this lecture, we are going to explore the structure of reports for non-technical audiences. We will look at what are the elements of structuring a non-technical audience report, and we will see how each of them have different qualities and how to optimize for the best engagement for a non-technical audience and the purpose that they have of our analysis. To begin with, let me revise the flow, the structure of knowledge that we saw for the non-technical audience 2 lectures back. If you remember this entire flow, we began with the executive summary, then we moved on to the key insights, then we moved on to recommendations, and then to the supporting data. I would pause this screen for you for 30 seconds to make good note of this kind of structure that we have studied briefly in our previous lecture. So let's look at each of these components in the brief summary, beginning with a very special feature of non-technical audience writing, executive summary. If you remember the abstract from our previous lecture, this serves the same function but in a radically different manner. The executive summary is a high-level overview of findings and key recommendations. If you remember, the abstract had everything that the technical document covered, but the executive summary only talks about findings and key recommendations. Just like the abstract, this is also extremely brief and dense with information. So if anybody is optimizing for time, they can read this brief document and can get the highlights and key recommendations that the document is offering at large. After the executive summary, we move on to something a little more expansive. The main takeaways presented clearly as key insights. These are the main insights of the document that the analysis has produced. These are the kind of patterns, the kind of trends, the kind of cause and effect relationships that has come out of the data analysis that you need to be aware of if you are a non-technical audience. These are pure raw insights that maybe you will be able to use and accommodate and utilize in your decision-making practices as a non-technical audience. If you are a data scientist, your job doesn't end here. After the key insights, you move on to recommendations. These are the actionable next steps based on the analysis. So, for a non-technical audience, the key insights themselves will be useful. But what will be more useful is your additional affinity to the analysis that you have produced and the recommendations that have been born out of it. So what do you think a non-technical audience should do? And what do you recommend as the next steps as somebody who has conducted an insightful analysis of the data also finds its rightful place within the communication for a non-technical audience? So this is where your insights do not only get limited to the pure reportage of the trends within data, but you can also suggest the possible and successful next steps that the non-technical audience can take. Now after this, we have the last component that the non-technical audience may not be so interested in, but just in case, if they want to know the kind of analysis that you have done, the kind of data set that you have selected, the kind of evidence that you have gathered, this component is present as a part of the non-technical document. The supporting data. These are the selected evidence to validate the conclusions that you have drawn in the form of key insights and recommendations. So, if the non-technical audience wants to check whether you know what you're talking about, they can go to the supporting data and derive independent conclusions by themselves. Remember we talked about replicability in the previous lecture? This is something similar functionally. Although the arrangement, if you see, will be very different, the supporting data serves a similar function that if somebody wants to double check the validity of your conclusions, they can do that independently and hopefully arrive on the same conclusions that can make your analysis as reliable as possible. Now let's reflect on this question for a moment. Why do business reports prioritize recommendations over technical details? Try and derive some reflections from this, make some notes based on the kind of discussions that we have had in the previous lectures. I will see you in a minute. And now is the time to dive deep into every single component of our report for the non-technical audience. Let's begin with that crafty little piece of information known as executive summary. The point of an executive summary is to capture attention. The executive summary should highlight the problem, the key findings, and the recommendations in 150 to 250 words. Does that range remind you of something? That's right. This is also the kind of density that we were aiming for in the abstract. That's why I draw that parallel in the very beginning of this lecture, that the executive summary functionally serves the same purpose as an abstract, but the components, the contents are radically different. The tone, the kind of vocabulary, the kind of jargon to use will also be different as compared to the abstract. Let's look at an example. Our analysis of customer churn data reveals that customers who receive fewer than 3 personalized interactions per month are 15% more likely to cancel their subscription. We recommend implementing automated engagement strategies which could increase retention by 20%. I'm pausing this screen for 30 seconds. Like we did in the previous class, try and analyze the different components of information, the different bits of information and insight which are present within these two sentences. In the last class, I held your hand through that analysis. In this class, I hope that you can do that independently. For 30 seconds, take a look at this passage and identify the different bits of insight and information that it is communicating. Now that you have noticed the kind of information components which are present in an ideal executive summary, I would like you to take 2 minutes to do this small exercise. Rewrite this passage that you see for a non-technical audience. A gradient boosting model achieved a 95% precision rate in fraud detection, significantly reducing false positives. Take some time. Break this down into first principles, check the utility. There's a hint in there. I won't tell you what, but there is a hint in there about the utility of the kind of analysis that you have generated. Try to rewrite this for a non-technical audience in the tone of an executive summary. I'll see you back. The next component to study is key insights. The job of key insights is to highlight the main findings. The key insights section presents the most critical takeaways in a simple, intuitive manner. The last word is extremely important. We also studied this in the previous lecture. Let me underline this again. The intuitive part is not about format. It is not about strict rules. It is more about responding to the manner in which our target audience understands information. Everybody, depending on the kind of domain that they belong to, they understand information in a certain flow, in a certain structure. So, our job as communicators is to design our information so as to suit the intuitions of our target audiences. That is why, time and again, I'm using the term intuitive to define the way that we should think about our communication design. Let's look at an example format for our key insights section. Finding 1. Customers with low engagement have higher churn rates. One sentence, dense with information, extremely insightful, and no useless words. There is no scope for misunderstanding or miscommunication. This is as clear communication as it is possible. Finding 2. Targeted email campaigns can lead to a 20% reduction in churn. If you see that, these two are internally dependent on each other, but they have been split into two key insights so that the logic of the first point leads to the implication of the second point. Let me read that again for you. Customers with low engagement have higher churn rates. That establishes the baseline logic. Now, what to do with this insight is that targeted email campaigns lead to a 20% reduction in churn. So in case if they have low engagement, the solution lies in targeted email campaigns. And there is a measurable kind of reduction in there. 20% is a specific, precise measurement that you can quantify for the results that you are supposed to expect. Therefore, one dense piece of knowledge has been broken down to its first principles and offered as two step-by-step insights that are interlinked to each other, but they are separate because it needs to be clarified in its communication so that there is no scope for any misunderstanding or any confusion or any misinterpretation. That's the job of the key insights section. Let's move on to a reflection for a minute. In this case, think about it. Why is a bullet point format more effective for this section, for the key insights? My hint is, think about this breakage of logic between 2 points and then think, why would a key insights section benefit from not being a paragraph? We have mostly dealt with paragraphs so far, and in fact, I, as a preferential writer, prefer writing in paragraphs. But for this particular section, for the key insights section, why is it that we are relying on bullet points? Think about it and I'll get back to you. The next part of our report for a non-technical audience is recommendations. This is where you don't only restrict yourself to reporting the insights, the trends, and the kind of logic that has emerged from your analysis, but you actually provide actionable steps. In this case, decision makers need clear, practical next steps so that they know what to do with the analysis that you have derived and not be lost in the way of making sense of the numbers and the insights that you have presented them. This section, metaphorically speaking, puts 2 and 2 together and offers the 4. Let's look at an example. We recommend launching a segmented email campaign targeting at-risk customers projected to reduce churn by 15%. If you notice, our example that has continued from the executive summary section is all part of the same example. So we are looking at the same problem statement and dividing them into separate pieces of information catered to a non-technical audience. So if you look at the recommendation section, they are providing a clear direction not only about what to do, but also about the projected outcome of that action. That's where you seem confident and sure about the reliability of your analysis. You have to be as clear in the projection as possible. You have to be as precise in the projection as possible so that the decision maker knows what is the ballpark estimate of the outcome that they can expect by putting your recommendations into implementation. Here's a little exercise for you. Suggest a business action based on this finding. So think about it. This finding is in the key insights section, and you have to now create a recommendation section based on this one line. 80% of mobile app users abandon purchases at the checkout screen. I'm sure this must have happened with you as well. For sure, this has happened with me. I have reached the checkout section, the checkout screen of my transaction, and I've changed my mind. So what do we do? As somebody who has come up with this insight in your analysis, what would you recommend? Think about it. Think about what a decision maker will benefit from and come up with a recommendation section based on this key insight. I'll see you again. The next part is supporting data. This section exists to justify the claims that you have made throughout the entire report. This section ensures that you are not just throwing darts in the dark, right? This section exists to support the kind of claims that you have made based on the analysis that you have derived. Now, at this juncture, I would like to draw a differentiation between the communication that we designed for the technical section versus for the non-technical audience. If you think about it, the description of the raw data set, the source of that data set, and what we did in our process of analyzing it was all a part of the methodology section. That emerged right after the introduction. So, for a technical audience, this right here, what is flashing on your screen right now, is of paramount importance because they need to work with this directly. This is where they are invested. This is the aspect of your analysis that they care for. Therefore, in the previous lecture, we prioritized and put this entire element of raw data, the insights from it, and the kind of methods that we used to clean the data, arrive at the analysis, the kind of algorithms we used, the kind of machines that we used to arrive at the analysis, all of this was put at the top. Because that is the information that our technical audience prioritizes. That's what I mean by the intuitive nature of how people make sense of the information that they are provided. For a technical audience, intuitively, the supporting data section will be of paramount importance. Therefore, we put it up at the front. For a non-technical audience, they are more invested in the insights and the recommendations that arrive from the supporting data. Therefore, we put that at the front. That's the difference between thinking in formats which are set in stone versus making your communication dynamic according to the intuitive understanding of your target audience. Now let's see what this supporting data segment does for a non-technical audience who is not as invested in it. So while the focus is on insights and actions for the non-technical audience, this supporting data provides credibility. Like I said in the previous lecture as well, the point of any technical analysis is to be replicable. If somebody wants to independently arrive at the same conclusions that you have offered, they should be able to do so. They should have all the tools and all the sources that can help them arrive at the same conclusions and the same logic that you have arrived at and based your recommendations on, so that they are absolutely sure that your analysis is not biased, it is not colored by your own preferences, but it is based on cold hard reasoning. So let's look at this table in which we have created two sections. The first section is insight and the second section is supporting data. The insight that we have derived is that the churn is highest among inactive users, and the supporting data for that insight would be 40% of inactive users cancel within 3 months. Based on this data, we have arrived at the insight, which is maybe devoid of any kind of precise numbers, but it arrives at the essence of this observation, that churn is highest among inactive users. Let's look at another one. The insight is that targeted emails improve retention. And in this case, the supporting data is that the response rate increased by 25%. When you are communicating the insight, you may not need to arrive at the precise numbers, the percentage mark. But if somebody wants to independently check the data, they should be able to see what is the exact measurement that you have taken into account during the course of your analysis. That is what ensures that they can arrive at the same data and the same conclusions should they decide to check the analysis that you have produced. Let's pause and reflect for a second. Why should supporting data be selective rather than exhaustive? In this case, whenever you see a supporting data segment, they would only come up with the things which are relevant to the report that they have produced. Why not an exhaustive list? Why should they not produce every single algorithm and every single analysis that the data scientist has produced? Think about it for a moment. I'll get back to you. I hope that that was a very insightful exercise, but I don't want to leave you in the dark. Let's discuss this for a second. Whenever a supporting data segment arrives in a non-technical analysis report, it is important to only select the data which directly has an implication on the recommendations that you have provided. So any data that was cleaned as an outlier or as an exception or as an aberration, that does not need to be there because that is not of value to a non-technical reader. For a technical reader, the entire exhaustive data will be useful because they would need to know how did you clean it? How did you arrive at the workable data set that you have done the analysis on? But the non-technical audience, they're already not interested in the data part. So we only select the data points which are directly consequential for the insights and the recommendations that we are offering. That is why in the table that we just saw, we only had the kind of insights which were directly interlinked with the data analysis and vice versa. We only included the data analysis which was directly resulting in an insight which was part of a recommendation. Therefore, it is always a smart choice to include selective data rather than the entire exhaustive list, because it is highly likely that the non-technical audience may not read it, may not engage with it, or worse, it may confuse them. It may cause them to have some trouble and difficulty in looking for the actual insightful data that has helped them arrive at the recommendations and conclusions. So, it's important, it's imperative that we choose the data rather than just dumping it all in the last section of supporting data. Tying it all up, it is important that we see this from a bird's eye point of view. For a non-technical audience, it's important that we have a results first approach rather than a methods first approach. The non-technical communication emphasizes insights, recommendations, and selective supporting data rather than complex methodologies. Why? Because once again, the non-technical audience may not have the utility for complex methodologies. They will definitely have the utility for the insights that arrive from that complex methodology. Mastering this style ensures that data-driven insights lead to real-world decision-making. This is where you, my friend, stop being just an analyst. but you start graduating to a level of critical thinking. You start having a stake in the decisions and the recommendations that will arrive from your data analysis. And this is where a writerly tendency comes into play. I always circle back to the fact that we are not looking at writing as a product. We are looking at it as a process. Every single segment that we have discussed so far assures you that you will have to develop writing as a perspective to communicate the insight which will make your knowledge and your contribution a key part of the decision-making stakeholders. Therefore, I would insist that as we go along different modules in this entire curriculum, please ensure that each module is aligned to help you develop writing not only as a product-based approach, but as a process, as a perspective that will empower you with an independent thinking system that will help you become a leader unto yourself. Now, before we close today's lecture, I would like you to have one final exercise. You can choose a technical topic and explain it in two different ways. Now that you have learned both for the technical as well as the non-technical audience, please choose a technical topic from your choice, from your discipline, and explain it for two audiences. One for a technical audience and one for a business-oriented audience. I have also defined what kind of non-technical audience for you, a business audience. So try and mold your idea, your knowledge for both of these different kinds of audiences, and notice the difference of approach, the perspective of being a writer that will come into play as you make every decision for your language, for your tone, and for the intuitive nature of designing your entire information. Take some time and design this outline for the technical audience as well as the non-technical audience. I promise it will be fun. So that was it from my side. We were discussing the structure of a report to appeal to a non-technical audience's intuitive understanding of information and the preferences that they would have of each different component of information. In the next class, we will look at some further qualities that we need to develop as far as our communication within an audience-centric view is concerned. Remember, we are exploring the entire gamut of audience analysis for this module, and we will keep exploring little depths of different components along the way. I hope that you had fun doing the exercises that we conducted in both these lectures, both for technical and non-technical audiences. Rest assured that more are coming your way. I hope that we keep learning together, and I hope that we keep asking these reflective questions together, because I'm sure that it is developing a muscle of self-reflection within you, which is important whenever we are learning something new. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you again in the next lecture. Until then, stay curious and keep learning. All the best. Namaskar.